You see, the television comedy Yes Minister, written by Tony Jay and Jonathan Lynn, was first broadcast. And now, a quarter of a century later, the former Conservative Party leader William Hague concludes his review of the series to find out just how true to life it was.
It's 25 years since the comedy programme Yes Minister first appeared on our television screens. It entertained millions of viewers with its insight into the struggles between politicians and civil servants. But did it reflect political reality? The impact of the programme firstly depended on the credibility of its storylines.
Oh, it's from the Minister's daughter.
You astound me, Ben.
Oh?
Trouble at mill?
Miss Hacker intends to join the Badger protest.
Oh, I thought it was over.
No, she and her boyfriend are going to conduct a 24-hour Save the Badgers vigil in Hayward Spinney.
The former Home Secretary David Blunkett can empathise with the situation in which Jim Hacker finds himself.
We're all subject to that, because I have sons, older sons, who gave me a terrible time when they were going through university and I was changing the funding scheme, or where they were not in favour in one case of ID cards, in another instance in terms of investigatory powers. I mean, we have family lives and we have to balance, as I know to my cost, the personal and the political.
Politicians could relate to Yes Minister is something that pleases its co-writer, Sir Anthony Jay.
When we started the series, we weren't sure whether it would catch on at all. In fact, that was quite a good thing, because we weren't sure if other people would find it as funny as we did. So we thought, well, let's make sure that even if they don't laugh all that much, at least they enjoy the half hour. So we set out to write good stories that people would like to follow and see the answer of. It wasn't just situations where people swap funny lines. It was a genuine developing story. We had no idea that we'd still be talking about it 25 years later. We were just hoping that they'd ask us to do a second series.
So how true to life were the events portrayed? Did any of the storylines actually happen in real life? Bernard Donahue was the head of the Downing Street Policy Unit in the late 1970s. He knew a lot about the inner workings of government, which he did share with the writers.
The civil service pay was based on what happened in my time there with Harold Wilson, when we had a terrible inflation crisis in this country. The economy was just collapsing, and we were introducing a pay policy that limited everyone to a £6 increase. But the civil servants wanted to get their pay rise in before the policy took place.
Well, with the financial crisis, it's obvious we shall have to bring in some form of pay restraint. See, the problem is, the MPs are being denied the pay rise they've been expecting just at the moment that we're due to bring forward the proposed civil service pay rise.
So there were urgent meetings on the basis of the civil service pay, and so we saw the civil service manoeuvring with their incredible bureaucratic skills and their office politics.
The storyline rings only too true for civil servants, as the former Cabinet Secretary Robin Butler explains.
I remember one time when the government was being difficult about civil service pay, as they so often were, and I was talking to the Permanent Secretary of the Treasury, Sir Terry Burns it was at the time, and I remember saying to Terry, well, you know, it's not the likes of you and me that I worry about, we're all right. It's the civil servants down the line who are going to have trouble with their mortgages and their cars and sending their children to school. And then I thought to myself, that sounds somehow familiar.
But one does owe it to one's junior colleagues to do everything one can. Ironic, isn't it, Frank? Trying to help them involves raising our own salaries, which we don't care about at all.
And I remembered Sir Humphrey saying exactly the same thing to Sir Frank with a look of sickening hypocrisy on his face. And it really did bring me down to earth.
Civil servants did tend to behave more like Sir Humphrey when it involved their own pay and conditions, as I found when I was Pensions Minister. In 1993, I was busy raising the retirement age for women from 60 to 65. I suggested that at the same time we should bring civil service retirement ages across the board, in line with the rest of the workforce. I was presented with no end of reasons why this could not happen, and found my officials behaving in an uncharacteristically obstructive manner. One of the most memorable scenes from the programme is when the minister goes on an official visit to an Islamic nation. The prospect of a dry evening was too much for Hacker and Sir Humphrey, who were clearly used to alcohol oiling the wheels of diplomacy. They conspire to arrange for a communications room to be set up close to the reception, where bottles of whisky were hidden in the diplomatic bag. Urgent messages were then sent to the minister, calling him to top up his orange juice with scotch, a thought that Lord Butler appreciated.
That absolutely was the sort of episode that could happen. I remember it very well. If I remember, Bernard says to Jim Hacker, "There's a message for you."
Oh, excuse me, Minister. There's an urgent call for you in the communications room. Mr. Hague.
Hang on, I don't want to be implicated in this.
General Hague? No, Mr. Hague, you know, with the dimples. Excuse me. Most important.
However, it wasn't just the minister who was implicated.
Oh, well, there is one for Sir Humphrey, Minister.
Oh, good, yes.
Yes, the Soviet embassy's on the line, Sir Humphrey, and Mr. Smirnov.
Foreign Office Minister Baroness Simons was a middle-ranking civil servant at the time.
Watching that scene, I didn't know the Foreign Office as well as I do today. At the time, I thought it was extremely funny, but I thought it was fanciful. I'm bound to say that having now been in the Foreign Office Ministry of Defence the best part of 8 years, I don't think that was quite as fanciful as all that. I think there was a good deal of an echo of the way in which things are handled.
Fanciful or fact?
It happened. I was there with James Callaghan in Pakistan.
Lord Donahue.
We had a very long evening there and a very long reception with just water or orange juice, and we plotted ahead of it how we could deal with this, and we said we had to have our desk very close to the huge reception room and the dinner room so that we could be in immediate contact with number 10 if there was a crisis, and we would go out to this desk with our glasses of orange juice and top it up from the desk drawers with very good whisky.
As the series developed, the writers started to get additional sources for storylines, as Tony J explains.
After the first episode went out, we got a phone call saying Lord Rothschild would like to talk to us, and Lord Rothschild was Senior Permanent Secretary. He'd been recruited in, and in particular what he gave us an insight into which we knew nothing about was how you tell off a Permanent Secretary. He knew all the dialogue. I was just writing down as fast as I possibly could everything he was saying, and we all transcribed it into the script of an episode where Sir Humphrey gets told off.
The Cabinet Secretary at the time, Robert Armstrong, recalls the scene all too well.
I can remember when Sir Humphrey Appleby was summoned by the then Cabinet Secretary, Sir Arnold Robinson, to be given a dressing down, a wigging, which was done with silken smooth discretion.
Yes, well, I'm not in any sense reprimanding you. I don't know the facts well enough. But as head of the service, I would like your assurance that he won't be putting it into practice.
Well, I certainly hope he won't be.
This could cause people to reflect on your soundness. Of course, I have no doubts about you myself, but anyway, I thought it might be useful to have a little chat.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Arnold.
The following day I had a meeting with my fellow permanent secretaries, and as they sat down they said, "Did you see Yes Minister last night, Roberts?" I said, "Yes." And then there was a pause, and I said, "I was wondering which of you to try that technique out on first." And the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Defence, Frank Cooper, who was a tough old bird, looked across the table and said, "Not on me, you don't."
Fortunately, Lord Armstrong didn't try to put it into practice, as his successor, Lord Butler, can testify.
I can't say that I was ever given a wigging by one of my predecessors. Indeed, they were always very good and kind to me. But I did recognise Sir Humphrey going to a Pall Mall club and taking advice from one or other of his predecessors. I frequently consulted Robert Armstrong and took advice from him and shared my agonies with him. There are many people that a Cabinet Secretary can share their agonies with, but his predecessor is one of them.
So there are scenes that ring true to political advisers and civil servants. But what about politicians? Here's my old Cabinet colleague, Ken Clarke.
When I was, Minister of Health, by early days at Health, and we were trying to bring in managerial changes in the health service, made a visit to the WHO in Stockholm, and the ambassador showed me an episode I'd not seen. So with Swedish subtitles, I watched an episode where the minister was visiting a new hospital, brilliantly run, sparklingly clean, efficiently managed, and notices about halfway through the episode it has no patients. And, of course, is told by Sir Humphrey, well, patients come later, Minister, but they're very untidy, and, what we're here to concentrate on is the efficiency and management of the hospital.
Sir Michael Bishard was Permanent Secretary at the Education Department. He recalls his minister, David Blunkett, using the empty hospital episode to make a serious political point.
I well remember the sense that actually it's a lot easier to run a hospital with no patients. David Blunkett, who was the Secretary of State, used that as a piece of after-dinner entertainment at a strategy away day involving officials and ministers. And I think it was his gentle way of just suggesting that we should be more concerned about outcomes than we should about defending the department at all costs.
The hospital was running, and it was running perfectly, and everyone was very busy, and they were all doing their jobs. The only difference with a normal hospital was that there weren't any patients. And I feared that that's what might happen if we didn't connect the civil service with delivery on the ground, not with policy development, which they're very good at, not with preparation for legislation and carrying it through the House, which they're very good at, but actually the delivery of something out there in the community.
So Yes Minister provided an insight into the life of Whitehall and became a tool of politicians trying to change the civil service. However, did real life become Yes Minister after the fact? Did any of the storylines in the programme happen subsequently, in real life? Well, do you remember Phoenix the calf, who was saved during the foot and mouth epidemic in 2001? Funny how Jim Hacker ordered the RAF to rescue a stray old English sheepdog from Salisbury Plain in Yes Prime Minister. And in January 1986, Sir Humphrey described how the job of the civil service was to keep tension high between the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. But apparently they didn't need much help.
The Chancellor will never forgive the Prime Minister for beating him to number 10, and the Prime Minister will never trust the Chancellor. After all, one never trusts anyone that one has deceived.
Surely such a thing couldn't happen in reality. And it's not just governments. Do you remember my policy of free schools in the 2001 general election? I couldn't explain the policy better than Jim Hacker's political advisor, Dorothy Wainwright, did in 1988.
Well, I suppose schools were like doctors. I mean, after all, under the National Health Service, you can choose whichever doctor you like to go to, can't you?
Yes.
And he gets paid per patient. Well, why don't we do the same with schools? Have a national education service. The parents could choose the schools they want, and the schools get paid per pupil.
So what other home truths are there? Any ideas from Ken Clark?
There's an episode where Sir Humphrey is banned from number 10 because he's interfering too much. And worst of all, has his pass taken away that gets him through the door and becomes absolutely desperate about what on earth the Prime Minister's up to without access to his vital advice. I remember Sir Humphrey gazing through the window at one point in agitation trying to get in. And I realised that if any of us had lost the little card that enabled us to get through from the Cabinet Office or through from the outer workings of number 10 into the inner sanctum, suddenly we'd feel bereft of power, influence, what was going on, what was being plotted behind us. So I could understand Sir Humphrey's desperate feelings, and I also thought how marvellous it might be thinking of one or two named individuals, if only we could exclude them from the inner workings of the government in that way.
I hope you're not thinking about me there, Ken. Perhaps we should leave it to Lord Butler to finish the anecdote.
That, like so many things in the series, is accurate. There is a locked door, and the Cabinet Secretary has a key. And that was a hilarious episode because Sir Humphrey, finding the lock was changed, had to climb out of the window, try to get in through the windows of the cabinet room, set off the alarm, and all hell broke loose.
I must protest in the strongest possible terms my profound opposition to a newly instituted practice which imposes severe and intolerable restrictions upon the ingress and egress of senior members of the hierarchy, and which will, in all probability, should the current deplorable innovation be perpetuated, precipitate a constriction of the channels of communication and culminate in a condition of organizational atrophy and administrative paralysis, which will render effectively impossible the coherent and coordinated discharge of the function of government within Her Majesty's United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
You mean you've lost your key?
And it had a particular relevance to me because in the very first week I was appointed Cabinet Secretary, I went to go through that door and found a man changing the lock. So I said, well, this is very discouraging if they got fed up with me as quickly as this. And he'd obviously seen the episode because he said, oh no, Sir Robin, somebody's lost their key and we've got to change the lock, but here's a key for you, Sir Robin.
The credibility, the characters, and the comedy of Yes Minister led in January 1984 to one of the most bizarre events of Margaret Thatcher's premiership. The programme won an award from the National Viewers and Listeners Association, and the Prime Minister was asked to present the award. Lord Butler helped her write her speech.
Bernard Ingham and I had the idea that it would make the speech more fun than usual if we wrote an episode which Margaret Thatcher could perform with Paul Eddington and Nigel Hawthorne. So we wrote a speech, and it was about her antipathy to economists. Now, when we wrote this piece, we had to persuade both Margaret Thatcher and the BBC that it should be used. What nobody knew was the difficulties we had in persuading Margaret Thatcher to do it. She could see that in some ways it was a coup, and yet she was extremely nervous about doing it. If Bernard Ingham and I rehearsed it with her once, we rehearsed it with her 50 times, and we rehearsed it yet again in the car going up to the BBC when she was going to give this speech, and she was still saying she wasn't sure whether she was going to do it. But when in the speech she said, I've noticed that never in the series has the Prime Minister appeared in it, and I thought I'd like to put that right today, so I have a little sketch. A frisson went round the room. Wonderful. People who were just used to sitting listening to another politician's speech were suddenly on the edge of their desk.
I want you to abolish economists.
Abolish economists, Prime Minister?
Yes, abolish economists, and quickly.
All of them, Prime Minister?
Yes, all of them.
And it finished up, as is well known, with Margaret Thatcher saying to Sir Humphrey, what degree did you get, Sir Humphrey? And Sir Humphrey looks modest and said, a double first, Prime Minister.
A double first.
Congratulations, Sir Humphrey.
Thank you very much.
But what in?
Politics and economics.
Capital, my dear Sir Humphrey. Capital. You'll know exactly where to start.
Yes, Prime Minister.
It was wonderful to see these three professionals in their different spheres working together. They performed it absolutely marvellously.
So 25 years on, what legacy has Yes Minister given us? Well, for civil servants, comparison to the man who is probably by now Lord Appleby is a chilling experience, as Michael Bishard explains.
There were certainly occasions when secretaries of state or ministers, wanting to make me feel uncomfortable, would have suggested that I was behaving like Sir Humphrey, which of course I regarded as the worst possible insult that anyone could pay me. And that always made me stop and think whether I was sufficiently focused on the end result or was becoming a bit obsessed with process myself.
The phrase Sir Humphrey was used no less than 34 times last year in parliamentary debate, including this reference from the Leader of the House of Commons, Peter Hain.
As he knows, the government has been introducing more and more bills subject to the pre-legislative scrutiny procedure so that there is proper consultation, so that we get things right, and Sir Humphrey doesn't always get things right, of course.
So why has Sir Humphrey become so useful as a form of political shorthand? Ken Clark.
Sir Humphrey has become a figure of speech which has entered the language as an example of occasions when a bureaucracy is slightly disconnected from the minister and is exercising his own power.
Oh, yes, Minister, Sir Humphrey will say.
The 40,000 jobs went. Why are there still so many people in the building, Sir Humphrey? 38,000 of them have been moved to new tasks, new government initiatives, which have been responsible. They are no longer administrators, they are now deliverers. It's become a convenient shorthand for describing what happens, to talk about the machinations of Sir Humphrey, whom we're all very fond of, really.
It's an incredible tribute to the authors of that series, who constructed a character that was both popular and understandable by the ordinary viewing public, the majority of whom have never taken a course in British government and politics. It was understandable to them at their level, but actually was of the highest standard of perception and writing, and was also very close to the real thing.
Lord Donahue. So do the civil service regret it? Lord Armstrong was Britain's most senior civil servant 25 years ago.
I regret it slightly because, as I say, I don't think the stock type portrayed is a reality, and using the name Sir Humphrey is a reminder of something which doesn't really actually happen. From that point of view, I regret it, but it's almost inevitable, isn't it? In the lecture that Sir Edward Bridges gave in 1950, he said that the civil service was like Wigan Pier or mothers-in-law, a stock joke, and Sir Humphrey's rather like that.
What was that analogy again, Lord Armstrong?
As Lord Bridges once said, making jokes about civil servants is like making jokes about mothers-in-law or Wigan Pier. It's a healthy thing.
Sorry, wrong Cabinet Secretary there. That was Lord Butler. So did Sir Humphrey give an unfair impression of the civil service? Unusually for a permanent secretary, Michael Bishard entered the senior ranks of the civil service from outside. And more importantly, after Yes Minister had appeared on television. So did he think Whitehall would be littered with Sir Humphreys?
I suppose when I joined the civil service, I did think there would probably be some characters like Sir Humphrey around Whitehall. And I don't think I was disappointed, really. I mean, I think I found a lot of people who are hugely talented and very clever. And I think Sir Humphrey is very talented and very clever. I found people who had worked together for many, many years, and therefore their network, what is sometimes known as the old boy network, was very highly developed, and clearly Sir Humphrey many, many times demonstrated that. And I think I was concerned that I would find people who were a bit resistant to change and a bit conservative with a small c, because that comes out very strongly in the programme, and I think I did find that too.
1997 saw the first change of government since Sir Humphrey hit our airwaves. For 18 years, Whitehall had been exposed politically to the Conservative government, of which I was a member. So how did the incoming new Labour government view the civil service? Lord Donahue, who had advised Wilson and Callaghan in Downing Street until 1979, himself became a government minister.
My impression was that quite a lot of the ministers, few of whom had ever served in government before, had any experience of government, a lot of them, their views of government and their job as a minister and working in Whitehall were shaped by Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. That, I think, is one reason why the Labour people came in rather suspicious of the civil service and feeling they must have more special advisers, because otherwise the civil service would con them. And they maybe had an excessive reaction in that direction. But I'm no doubt that Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister were, as programmes, the primary education of most ministers.
Lord Butler was Cabinet Secretary when Tony Blair entered Downing Street. How does he think Yes Minister changed perceptions of the civil service?
I think that it may have caused people to take it a bit more seriously than they should have done, and to have drawn the conclusion that civil servants are constantly manoeuvring against ministers. And that is, in my experience, untrue. If the public go around with their only impression of the civil service being Sir Humphrey, yes, perhaps that does do the civil service less than justice.
The former Home Secretary, David Blunkett, agrees. He thinks that some of the historic material Yes Minister was based on, such as Barbara Castle and Richard Crossman's diaries, had a skewed view of reality.
They did tend to feel that what was in fact bureaucratic inertia and in some cases a lack of gearing up to project management and modern leadership. They put it down to political blockage, to some sort of political or philosophical objection. I don't think that is true for a minute. I think that the civil service that I've met have been keen to learn about, to understand what you wanted them to do.
That's not a view shared throughout Westminster. According to Michael Bishard, one of David Blunkett's own permanent secretaries, Yes Minister did have an adverse effect, but not in the way you might expect.
The programme was very fair about the civil servants. Actually, if you think about it, the characters in Yes Minister are all rather lovable, and the fun is fairly gentle. So in that sense, I think the civil service was quite fortunate that it had a programme which was just gently poking fun at it. And I think in a way that may, in the longer term, have had a malign influence, because I think it made people less concerned about reforming the civil service. And I think because of Yes Minister, there are a lot more people out there who think, well, it's really quite a nice, comfortable civil service that we have, and it doesn't do a lot of damage, and they're really rather nice people, and by and large we should leave it alone.
However, Ken Clarke thinks this whole debate may have got a bit out of hand.
Yes Minister amused people, entertained people, gave people an insight into the workings of an organisation perhaps they'd never seen before. But you've got to be a complete idiot if you watch Yes Minister and you think this is literally what goes on between John Major and his officials, or Tony Blair and his officials. No, it's not. It is a grotesque exaggeration. It is a parody. It is a tease. It's actually very British in its humour, because it is subtle and intelligent and so on. You've got to be a real pompous stuffed shirt if you think it's done any lasting damage.
So, what is my overall view of Yes Minister and its portrayal of the civil service? I think that when given clear direction by ministers, the British civil service is unrivalled in its professionalism and dedication. However, where Yes Minister becomes true to life is when you have a lazy minister, or a minister who doesn't have a purpose, a minister like Jim Hacker. The machinery of the civil service is all too good at carrying on without you and going in a direction of its own. One of my favourite scenes from the series is where the private secretary, Bernard, explains to the minister that he can simply move his workload from his in-tray to his out-tray without worry.
You just transfer all the letters from your in-tray to your out-tray, put a brief note in the margin if you wish to see a reply, and if you don't, you need never see or hear of it again.
Do you mean to seriously tell me that if I transfer everything from here to here without even reading it, that's all I have to do? It'll be dealt with?
Precisely.
Properly?
Immaculate.
Well, what's a minister here for, then?
A minister is there to drive the machinery of government, or be carried along by it. And either way, the civil service will say, Yes, Minister. Isn't that right?
Yes, Minister.
Thank you, Sir Humphrey.
Yes, Minister. The View from Whitehall was presented by William Hague, and the producer was Anthony Worrell.